November 7th, 1942. Somewhere east of Sidi Bouzid, Tunisia. Major Heinrich Schreiber lowered his field glasses and allowed himself a thin smile. Through the shimmering heat haze of the North African desert, he watched a column of peculiar angular vehicles bouncing across terrain that should have been impassable for wheeled transport. American reconnaissance cars, his intelligence officer had reported. Copies of the Kübelwagen, probably inferior ones at that. Schreiber commanded the reconnaissance battalion of the 10th Panzer Division, a unit that had cut its teeth in the savage fighting across the Soviet steppes. His men drove Kübelwagens, those remarkable lightweight vehicles that Porsche and Volkswagen engineers had perfected over 5 years of development. The Kübelwagen was a triumph of German engineering, a vehicle so efficient it could traverse terrain that destroyed heavier machines, so economical it sipped fuel like a frugal housefrau nursing rationed supplies. Now these Americans, fresh off their ships, presumed to challenge German mastery of mobile warfare with their own reconnaissance vehicles. Schreiber had read the intelligence summaries. The American vehicle, designated Jeep, supposedly carried a crew of 4, mounted machine guns, and possessed 4-wheel drive. The specifications seemed adequate on paper, but Schreiber knew what paper specifications meant when confronted with the brutal reality of desert warfare. Sand that swallowed vehicles whole, heat that boiled engines dry, distances that separated the competent from the dead. The Americans would learn. They always did, eventually. But learning in North Africa came at a price measured in burned-out vehicles and men who died of thirst beside them. What Major Schreiber could not know, watching those distant American vehicles through his Zeiss optics, was that he was witnessing the opening act of a transformation that would shatter German confidence in their technological superiority. Those angular machines bouncing across the Tunisian desert would multiply like locusts. They would appear in places German doctrine declared impossible. They would demonstrate an approach to mechanized warfare so fundamentally different from German thinking that it would take years for Wehrmacht officers to comprehend what they were facing. The Jeep was about to teach the German army a lesson in industrial mathematics, and the equation was brutally simple. 647,000 adequate vehicles defeat 50,000 excellent ones. Every single time. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The story of this confrontation began not in the North African desert, but in a modest factory in Butler, Pennsylvania, on June 19, 1940. The American Bantam Car Company, a struggling manufacturer of small civilian automobiles, received specifications from the United States Army that seemed designed to ensure failure. Design and deliver a working prototype of a quarter-ton 4-wheel drive reconnaissance vehicle in 49 days. The vehicle must weigh no more than 1,300 pounds, carry a crew of 3, mount a machine gun, and possess a wheelbase of no more than 80 inches. Roy Evans, Bantam's president, understood that his company's survival depended on delivering what the army demanded. He contacted Karl Probst, a freelance automotive designer working in Detroit. Probst had 2 days to decide whether the impossible could be made possible. He said yes, and the clock started ticking. Working 18-hour days through the brutal summer of 1940, Probst and the Bantam engineering team created something revolutionary through systematic elimination of everything unnecessary. No frills, no comfort, no concessions to aesthetics. Every pound mattered. Every component served multiple purposes. The result weighed 1,950 pounds, 650 pounds over the Army's specification, but it performed beyond expectations. The Bantam prototype arrived at Camp Holabird, Maryland, on September 23, 1940. For the next 30 days, Army testers subjected it to conditions designed to destroy ordinary vehicles. Mud, sand, steep grades, water crossings, continuous operation without maintenance. The little vehicle absorbed punishment that broke military trucks weighing 3 times as much. Major Herbert Laws, observing the trials, wrote in his official report that this vehicle represented a fundamental advancement in tactical mobility. But the United States Army had a problem. Bantam was too small to produce vehicles in the quantities modern war would demand. The company's entire manufacturing capacity could perhaps deliver a few thousand vehicles over several years. The Army needed tens of thousands, potentially hundreds of thousands, and they needed them quickly. So the Army made a decision that would prove decisive for the war's outcome. They invited Willys Overland and Ford Motor Company to examine the Bantam prototype and submit their own designs. Willys Overland brought something crucial to the competition: the Go Devil engine. This 134 cubic inch four-cylinder power plant generated 60 horsepower, 15 more than Bantam's Continental engine. That extra power meant the difference between struggling up hills and charging them, between barely pulling a trailer and confidently towing anti-tank guns. The Go Devil transformed the Jeep from adequate to formidable. Ford contributed manufacturing efficiency that only America's largest automaker could provide. Ford engineers redesigned dozens of components for simplified production. The front grille, originally welded from individual slats, became a single stamped steel piece with 9 vertical slots. This change alone cut production time by 30% and reduced material waste by 40%. More importantly, it created an iconic face that would become instantly recognizable across every battlefield of the war. By July 1941, the Army had standardized the design. Willys would produce the MB model. Ford would manufacture identical vehicles under license, designated GPW. The contracts were signed. Willys would deliver 16,000 vehicles initially. The unit cost was set at $738.74. This price point should have alerted anyone paying attention to what was coming. The Army was purchasing a 4-wheel-drive military-grade reconnaissance vehicle for less than a civilian Ford sedan, which cost $795. No European manufacturer could approach such economics. The German Kübelwagen, specifically designed for military use, cost approximately $950 to manufacture. The Mercedes-Benz Type 170 VK, Germany's other military, light vehicle, cost nearly 3 times the Jeep's price and offered inferior off-road capability. The first production, Willys MB, rolled off the Toledo assembly line in November 1941. Production that first month totaled 93 vehicles. Then came December 7, 1941. The attack on Pearl Harbor transformed everything. Jeep production lines went to 2 shifts, then 3. Women replaced men who enlisted. By February 1942, monthly production reached 1,500 units. By June, 4,200. By December 1942, Willys and Ford together were producing 8,000 Jeeps per month. These were not just numbers on production reports. These were physical vehicles, each one requiring 900 pounds of steel, 30 pounds of copper, 75 pounds of aluminum, and 8 tires. Multiply those material requirements across thousands of vehicles per month, and the scale of American industrial mobilization becomes clear. Germany in 1942 was desperately rationing these exact materials. Copper supplies were so constrained that the Wehrmacht substituted steel for brass in ammunition cartridge cases. Rubber shortages forced introduction of synthetic tires that wore out 3 times faster than natural rubber. Aluminum was strictly reserved for aircraft production. The Americans were consuming materials for Jeep production alone that would have kept Germany's entire aircraft industry running for months, while simultaneously outproducing Germany in aircraft, tanks, ships, and every other category of military equipment. The German army, meanwhile, had entered World War II with a different philosophy of mechanization. German military doctrine emphasized quality over quantity, specialized vehicles for specific purposes, and conservation of limited resources. The Kübelwagen embodied this philosophy perfectly. Designed by Ferdinand Porsche in 1938 and 39, the Porsche Kübelwagen was a masterpiece of efficient engineering. It utilized a rear-mounted air-cooled engine derived from the Volkswagen Beetle, producing 25 horsepower from a 985 cubic centimeter displacement. The vehicle weighed just 1,560 pounds empty, making it light enough to be manhandled out of soft sand or mud by its crew. Ground clearance measured 9.6 inches, and the rear-wheel drive configuration with limited slip differential provided adequate traction in most conditions. The Kübelwagen's design prioritized low weight and fuel efficiency. It could travel 250 miles on a single tank of fuel, approximately 16 gallons. This range was critical for German forces operating across the vast distances of North Africa and the Soviet Union, where fuel supplies were always constrained. The vehicle's air-cooled engine eliminated the need for liquid cooling systems that froze in Russian winters or boiled dry in African summers. German military planners believed they had created the ideal reconnaissance vehicle, light enough to avoid bogging down, fuel-efficient enough to operate far from supply lines, simple enough for field maintenance. The Kübelwagen performed admirably in the Polish campaign, the French campaign, and the initial stages of Operation Barbarossa. German reconnaissance units praised its reliability and agility, but the Kübelwagen had limitations that would become painfully apparent when confronted with American jeeps. Rear-wheel drive meant the vehicle struggled in loose sand and deep mud, conditions where power to all four wheels proved decisive. The 25-horsepower engine, adequate for the vehicle's light weight, left no power margin for towing or heavy loads. The Kübelwagen could carry 4 men and their equipment, but it could not tow artillery pieces or haul ammunition. Its specialized design meant it excelled at reconnaissance, but could not easily adapt to other roles. Most critically, the Kübelwagen was built in limited numbers. From 1940 through 1944, Volkswagen's factory at Fallersleben produced approximately 55,000 Kübelwagens total. Peak annual production reached just over 15,000 vehicles in 1943. These numbers reflected Germany's limited industrial capacity and the constant trade-offs required in a resource-constrained economy. Building more Kübelwagens meant fewer tanks, less ammunition, or reduced aircraft production. The Jeep represented a completely different philosophy. American engineers accepted that the vehicle would be heavier, less fuel-efficient, and more expensive in materials than the Kübelwagen. But those costs purchased capabilities that transformed tactical mobility. Four-wheel drive meant the Jeep could traverse terrain that stopped the Kübelwagen. The 60-horsepower Go Devil engine provided power reserves for towing, for climbing steep grades under full load, for maintaining speed across rough terrain. The robust frame and suspension could handle abuse that would destroy lighter vehicles. Most importantly, the Jeep was designed from the beginning for mass production and field adaptability. Every major component could be removed and replaced with basic tools. The engine used splash lubrication, virtually eliminating oil pressure problems. The electrical system employed a 24-volt generator that provided reliable starting even in extreme cold. Maintenance intervals were extended beyond what German vehicles achieved. When maintenance was required, it could be performed by soldiers with minimal technical training rather than specialized mechanics. The Jeep's versatility exceeded anything in the German vehicle inventory. With minimal modification, a standard Jeep became an ambulance carrying 3 stretcher cases. 4 brackets and a pintle mount transformed it into a weapons platform for 30 caliber or 50 caliber machine guns. Add railroad wheels, and it ran on tracks for rapid movement along damaged rail lines. Install radio equipment, and it became a mobile communications center. Mount a stretcher rack, and it evacuated wounded soldiers from frontline positions. This adaptability meant American commanders could concentrate specialized vehicles where absolutely necessary, while using Jeeps for everything else. German generals faced constant shortages of specialized transport for specific missions. American commanders simply used more Jeeps. The first confrontation between these two philosophies came in November 1942 during Operation Torch, the Allied invasion of French North Africa. American forces landed at Casablanca, Oran, and Algiers, establishing beachheads and pushing inland toward Tunisia, where German forces were rushing reinforcements to block Allied advance. General der Panzertruppen Hans-Jürgen von Arnim commanded the 5th Panzer Army, hastily assembled from units, scraped together across the Mediterranean theatre. His reconnaissance battalions, equipped with Kübelwagens and armoured cars, began probing American positions to identify unit boundaries and locate weaknesses for counterattacks. They expected to face inexperienced troops using inferior equipment. What they encountered instead puzzled and then alarmed German reconnaissance officers. American reconnaissance units operated with aggressive confidence unusual for green troops. They appeared everywhere across the front, often in places German doctrine considered inaccessible to wheeled vehicles. Their vehicles moved with unexpected speed across desert terrain, keeping pace with German armoured cars despite weighing significantly more. Most puzzling, American reconnaissance forces seemed unconcerned about vehicle losses. They engaged in firefights where prudent reconnaissance would have withdrawn, accepting vehicle casualties that would cripple a German battalion for weeks. Oberst Friedrich Weber commanded the reconnaissance battalion of the 10th Panzer Regiment. His after-action report from January 1943, preserved in German military archives, documented his unit's first extended engagement with American forces. Weber wrote that American reconnaissance vehicles possessed mobility exceeding intelligence estimates. They appeared in locations reconnaissance deemed impossible for wheeled transport. Their speed on open desert terrain approached German armoured cars, yet they weighed half as much and navigated ground German vehicles could not traverse. Weber's report identified specific tactical advantages the Jeep demonstrated. American reconnaissance sections operated in dispersed formations that German doctrine would consider too spread out for mutual support, but the Jeep's speed allowed them to concentrate rapidly when contact was made. American forward observers travelled in Jeeps, keeping pace with advancing infantry and calling artillery fire with minimal delay. German forward observers, travelling in Kübelwagens when vehicles were available or on foot when they were not, struggled to maintain position and communication. Most concerning to Weber was American materiel expenditure. In one engagement on January 15, 1943, his battalion destroyed or disabled 7 American Jeeps during a 3-hour running fight southwest of Kasserine Pass. Weber considered this a tactical success. The next morning, the same American unit appeared with 9 Jeeps, having received replacements overnight. Weber's battalion had lost 2 Kübelwagens in that engagement. They remained unreplaced for 6 weeks. This pattern repeated across every sector where German and American forces engaged. American units losing vehicles could expect replacements within 48 to 72 hours. German units losing vehicles might wait months and often received nothing. The casualty replacement rate revealed fundamental differences in how the two armies approached logistics and industrial mobilization. German technical intelligence teams captured their first intact Jeep in January 1943 near Kasserine Pass. The vehicle was immediately shipped to Wehrmacht testing facilities at Kummersdorf for detailed examination. What German engineers discovered shocked them and revealed how thoroughly American and German approaches to military mechanization had diverged. The Jeep's engine contained only 8 major moving parts compared to 14 in the Kübelwagen's power plant. Simplicity meant fewer failure points and easier field repair. The Jeep's transfer case, the component that engaged 4-wheel drive, could be disassembled and rebuilt in 30 minutes with tools carried on the vehicle. The equivalent Kübelwagen component, because the vehicle lacked 4-wheel drive, was simpler but less capable. German vehicles requiring 4-wheel drive used complex systems that demanded 3 hours and specialized equipment to service. German engineers noted another critical difference. The Jeep was designed for replacement rather than repair. Components were modular, meant to be swapped out quickly rather than rebuilt in place. This approach required massive spare parts inventories and excellent logistics, but it meant damaged vehicles could be returned to service in hours rather than days. The German approach emphasized field repair using whatever materials were available, because spare parts were always in short supply. This worked adequately in peace or during short campaigns, but years of sustained combat had exhausted skilled labor and depleted parts inventories. Hauptmann Otto Skorzeny, who would later achieve fame rescuing Mussolini from Italian partisans, examined captured jeeps as part of his duties with German special forces. His assessment, written in March 1943, noted that the jeep represented a fundamentally different philosophy of military transportation. It combined simplicity approaching the Kübelwagen with capabilities exceeding German specialized reconnaissance vehicles. More concerning was the apparent ease of mass production, with every component showing evidence of manufacturing techniques Germany could not replicate at scale. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. German intelligence began piecing together American production numbers from captured vehicle serial numbers and prisoner interrogations. By March 1943, estimates suggested America was building between 8 and 10,000 jeeps monthly. This figure was initially dismissed as impossible by Wehrmacht High Command. General Franz Halder, who had served as Chief of the Army General Staff until September 1942, had calculated that maximum sustainable production of light military vehicles for any industrialized nation was approximately 3,000 units monthly, based on German industrial capacity and steel availability. The reality was far more staggering. By mid-1943, combined Willys and Ford production reached 12,000 jeeps per month. By December 1943, 15,000. At peak production in March 1944, monthly output exceeded 21,000 vehicles. Consider the mathematics that German generals struggled to accept. In 24 months from January 1943 to December 1944, American factories delivered approximately 373,000 jeeps. This single vehicle type exceeded Germany's entire production of all military vehicles combined in 1942. The Kübelwagen achieved peak production of 15,000 units for all of 1943. Americans were building more jeeps in a single month than Germany built Kübelwagens in an entire year. But production numbers alone do not explain why the jeep fundamentally altered German strategic calculations. The vehicle's psychological impact emerged from its ubiquity, combined with its versatility. German commanders who had spent careers managing scarce resources suddenly faced an opponent who possessed essentially unlimited motorization. General Major Siegfried Westphal, Rommel's chief of operations during the North African campaign, wrote in his post-war memoirs that the American jeep was everywhere. Americans used it for reconnaissance, ambulances, communications vehicles, artillery tractors, weapons platforms, and general transportation. German forces would destroy 10 jeeps in an engagement, and 20 more appeared the next day. It became psychologically demoralizing to realize Americans possessed effectively unlimited replacement capacity. This observation revealed the core strategic disparity that would doom German military prospects. The German army had entered World War II with approximately 514,000 horses. Throughout the war, Germany employed approximately 2.75 million horses total, maintaining an average of 1.1 million horses in service at any given time. 80% of Wehrmacht logistics depended on horse-drawn transport. German infantry divisions each required approximately 5,300 horses for transportation and supply. These horses consumed fodder, required veterinary care, and moved at walking pace. A horse-drawn supply column could cover perhaps 20 miles per day under good conditions. In mud, snow, or across damaged roads, that figure dropped to 10 miles or less. Horses could not operate at night without risk of injury. They tired, they died from overwork or enemy fire, and replacing them required months of procurement and training. American infantry divisions in 1944 employed 0 horses. Every ounce of supplies, every piece of equipment, every wounded soldier moved on wheels or tracks. The jeep alone did not create this mobility gap, but it exemplified the philosophy that made American logistics superior. Where Germans designed vehicles for specific purposes and used them carefully to preserve limited assets, Americans designed vehicles for maximum adaptability and used them aggressively, knowing replacements were always available. The contrast became brutally apparent during the Italian campaign. American forces landing at Salerno in September 1943 faced mountainous terrain that German defenders assumed would restrict mechanized mobility to a few roads easily defended. German positions in the Apennine Mountains seemed impregnable to motorized assault. Infantry would have to advance on foot through terrain favoring defense. American commanders thought differently. Engineers improved rough trails into jeep-accessible routes overnight. Supply convoys that German planners assumed impossible began delivering ammunition and rations directly to forward positions, perched on mountainsides. Wounded soldiers who would have died awaiting evacuation by stretcher-bearer teams were in jeep ambulances rolling toward aid stations within minutes of being hit. Oberst Hans von Luck, commanding the 21st Panzer Division Reconnaissance Battalion after transfer from North Africa to France, observed American mobility during the weeks following D-Day. His memoir described engagements that revealed the full extent of American material superiority. On June 15, 1944, his battalion destroyed or disabled 7 American jeeps during a 3-hour firefight near Carentan. German forces considered this a tactical victory, demonstrating superior fighting skills. The next morning, the same American unit appeared with 9 jeeps, having received replacements overnight from depot stocks that seemed inexhaustible. Von Luck's battalion had lost 2 Kübelwagens and 1 motorcycle combination in that engagement. They remained unreplaced for 6 weeks. When replacements finally arrived, they were not new Kübelwagens but horse-drawn wagons, because German vehicle production could not keep pace with combat losses. This disparity affected operational planning at every command level. German reconnaissance units learned to avoid contact with American forces whenever possible, not from fear of casualties to personnel, but because equipment losses could not be sustained. Each destroyed Kübelwagen represented months of accumulated production capacity that Germany could not spare. American reconnaissance units aggressively sought contact, knowing damaged vehicles would be quickly replaced, and that engaging German forces revealed valuable intelligence. The psychological impact of this certainty cannot be overstated. American soldiers knew their equipment was expendable. Germans knew theirs was irreplaceable. This knowledge shaped tactical decisions in countless small ways that accumulated into strategic advantage. The Jeep's mechanical reliability amplified its effectiveness beyond what pure capability specifications suggested. The Kübelwagen, despite its reputation for simplicity, required constant maintenance from trained mechanics. Its air-cooled engine needed careful monitoring to prevent overheating. Its reduction gears in the wheel hubs, a clever engineering solution that provided low-speed pulling power, required frequent lubrication and adjustment. The limited slip differential demanded specialized knowledge to maintain properly. The Jeep, by contrast, could be kept running by soldiers with minimal technical training. The Go Devil engine used splash lubrication that virtually eliminated oil pressure problems. The transmission featured synchronized second and third gears, allowing smooth shifting under stress without requiring double clutching skills. The electrical system was robust and weatherproof. Maintenance intervals were extended, and when maintenance was required, it consisted of straightforward procedures clearly described in technical manuals written for ordinary soldiers rather than specialist mechanics. By 1944, the American supply system maintained parts inventories that would have seemed fantastical to German logisticians. A typical American core-level supply depot stocked complete replacement engines, transmissions, transfer cases, and axles for every vehicle type in theatre. Repair depots could swap a Jeep engine in 45 minutes. Transmissions could be replaced in under 2 hours. Entire vehicles could be rebuilt from components faster than German mechanics could diagnose complex problems in Kübelwagens. The Wehrmacht maintenance doctrine emphasized field repair over replacement because spare parts were always scarce. German mechanics were trained to rebuild components using whatever materials were available, cannibalizing parts from disabled vehicles, fabricating replacement pieces from scrap metal. This approach worked adequately during peacetime or short campaigns, but years of sustained operations exhausted the skilled labor pool and depleted what little parts inventory existed. By 1944, German vehicle readiness rates had fallen to approximately 60%. Only 6 of every 10 German military vehicles were operational at any given time. The Americans maintained 95% readiness rates even during intense combat operations. This gap meant that American forces could sustain operational tempo that German forces could not match even when German units possessed equivalent numbers of vehicles on paper. The Battle of the Bulge in December 1944 demonstrated these disparities with brutal clarity. General der Panzertruppen Sepp Dietrich's 6th Panzer Army, the main German striking force, included approximately 44,000 horses for logistics support. These horses pulled supply wagons through the Ardennes forests, moving fodder, ammunition, and fuel, at walking pace over roads choked with traffic and blocked by destroyed vehicles. The American forces defending the Ardennes employed approximately 75,000 vehicles of all types, including an estimated 12,000 jeeps. When Germans achieved initial tactical surprise and overran American supply dumps, they found themselves unable to exploit these captured resources effectively. The captured supplies were packaged for motor transport. Ammunition came in crates sized for vehicle loads, too heavy for horses to pull efficiently. Fuel was stored in 5-gallon jerry cans, excellent for vehicle transport but impractical for horse-drawn logistics. Rations were packaged in quantities requiring vehicles to distribute effectively. German forces, still dependent on horses for the bulk of their logistics, could not rapidly move captured materials where they were needed most. American reinforcements, moving entirely by motor transport, restored defensive positions within 48 hours. Jeeps carrying infantry reinforcements, towing anti-tank guns, and hauling ammunition arrived in time to seal penetrations that might otherwise have widened into catastrophic breakthroughs. The Jeep's contribution went beyond simple transportation. It enabled tactical innovations that were impossible for forces dependent on horse-drawn logistics. American artillery forward observers traveled in Jeeps equipped with radio sets, allowing them to keep pace with advancing infantry and rapidly adjust fire missions based on real-time battlefield observations. German forward observers traveled on foot or occasionally on motorcycles when fuel was available, creating communication delays that American gunners exploited ruthlessly. American medical evacuation began at front lines. Jeep ambulances brought wounded soldiers to aid stations within minutes of injury, dramatically reducing mortality rates from shock and blood loss. The Jeep ambulance configuration could carry 3 stretcher cases or 4 sitting wounded, and its speed meant that wounded soldiers reached surgical facilities while still viable for treatment. German medical evacuation relied heavily on horse-drawn carts for the initial stage of casualty transport, taking hours to navigate from front lines to aid stations. Studies conducted after the war demonstrated stark differences in casualty outcomes directly attributable to evacuation speed. American wounded reached surgical facilities an average of 1.3 hours after injury. German wounded averaged 8.7 hours. This difference saved thousands of American lives and returned thousands more soldiers to duty after recovery. The Jeep ambulance, a simple adaptation of the basic vehicle, provided battlefield medicine with decisive logistical advantage. The Jeep made battlefield mobility routine rather than exceptional. Junior American officers traveled by Jeep between dispersed units, coordinating actions in real time based on direct observation. German officers traveled on foot or horseback, communicating by radio when equipment was available or by courier when it was not. This mobility gap affected decision-making speed at every command level from platoon to army group. By mid-1944, German generals recognized they faced not just superior numbers, but fundamentally superior systems. General Feldmarschall Gerd von Rundstedt, commanding all German forces in the West, wrote to Oberkommando der Wehrmacht in August 1944 that American advantages in motorization allowed them to concentrate forces 3 to 4 times faster than Germany could respond. American reconnaissance elements penetrated to German rear areas routinely, while German reconnaissance struggled to maintain contact with American forward units. This mobility differential was decisive. Germany could not win battles, it could not properly fight, because American forces repositioned faster than German commanders could react. This assessment from one of Germany's most experienced field marshals acknowledged an uncomfortable reality. The Jeep had not won the war alone, but it exemplified the American industrial and logistical approach that made German defeat mathematically inevitable. Consider a specific example from the Normandy campaign that illustrates how tactical mobility translated to operational advantage. On July 6, 1944, the 4th Infantry Division needed to establish observation posts overlooking German positions near Saint-Lô. The mission required positioning forward observers in locations 3 to 4 miles ahead of friendly lines through terrain under constant German artillery fire. A German unit facing this mission would have sent observers on foot, requiring 4 to 6 hours to reach positions and establish communications via radio or field telephone. Return trips for supply or personnel rotation would take similar time. Casualty evacuation was essentially impossible, without risking additional personnel in recovery operations. The entire process was slow, dangerous, and inflexible. The 4th Infantry Division used jeeps. Observers reached their positions in 40 minutes, travelling at speeds that made German artillery targeting difficult. Each observation post maintained jeep transport on call, allowing position changes when German counter-battery fire became too accurate. Supply runs happened twice daily, delivering food, water, batteries, and ammunition. Casualties were evacuated within 20 minutes of being wounded, with jeep ambulances racing back to aid stations while medics provided treatment during transit. This pattern repeated across every front where American forces operated. In Italy's Apennine Mountains, jeeps climbed trails that German doctrine declared impossible for vehicles. In Pacific Islands, jeeps navigated jungle tracks that Japanese forces assumed would restrict American mobility to foot movement. In the Hurtgen Forest, jeeps supplied frontline positions that German defenders believed were beyond vehicle reach. The cumulative effect of thousands of such tactical advantages compounded into operational superiority that no amount of German fighting skill could overcome. American forces moved faster, supplied more efficiently, evacuated wounded more rapidly, and maintained command coordination more effectively. The jeep was the visible symbol of this systematic advantage. German units captured every intact jeep possible and pressed them into Wehrmacht service. Some SS Panzer divisions equipped their reconnaissance battalions entirely with captured American vehicles, recognizing their superiority over German equipment. But captured jeeps created new problems that highlighted why material abundance mattered as much as vehicle capability. Captured jeeps required American gasoline, which burned at different octane ratings than German fuel. Using German gasoline caused engine knocking and reduced power output. Captured jeeps needed American spare parts, which German supply systems could not provide. A broken jeep component meant cannibalizing another captured vehicle, gradually reducing the pool of operational vehicles. Maintenance required understanding American engineering conventions, which differed from German practice in critical ways. Mechanics trained on German vehicles made errors servicing jeeps, causing failures that proper maintenance would have prevented. The result was that captured jeeps often broke down within weeks and became unrecoverable hulks, littering German rear areas, monuments to Germany's inability to sustain even captured American equipment. The most telling German attempt at imitation came in March 1945, when Mercedes-Benz engineers, working from a captured jeep, designed a German equivalent featuring four-wheel drive and simplified construction for mass production. The prototype reached testing just as American forces entered the Mercedes factory at Stuttgart. The vehicle's estimated production cost was 2,400 Reichsmarks, approximately triple the Jeep's cost even before accounting for exchange rate distortions. Tooling requirements would have demanded factory capacity Germany no longer possessed, and material allocations that were impossible given 1945 shortages. German automotive production in 1943 totaled approximately 78,000 vehicles of all types, including trucks, cars, and specialized vehicles. American production that same year exceeded 791,000 vehicles, including more than 130,000 Jeeps. The ratio was 10-1 in America's favor, and that gap widened in 1944 and 45 as German production collapsed under Allied bombing while American production continued expanding. This production disparity reflected deeper differences in industrial capacity and economic organization. The Willys plant in Toledo employed approximately 20,000 workers at peak production, operating 3 8-hour shifts continuously. The Ford plant at River Rouge employed 90,000 workers, building Jeeps alongside other military equipment. Germany's entire Kübelwagen production was centered at the Volkswagen plant at Fallersleben, with approximately 12,000 workers total. American Jeep production was fully additive to other military manufacturing. Building Jeeps did not reduce tank production, aircraft manufacturing, or ship construction. America's industrial base was large enough and resource-rich enough to do everything simultaneously. Germany faced constant trade-offs. Building more Kübelwagens meant fewer tanks or less ammunition or reduced aircraft production. Every strategic decision required painful compromises between competing necessities. By late 1944, captured German planning documents revealed that Wehrmacht logistics officers had stopped trying to match American mobility. Instead, they focused on managing the inevitable consequences of that gap. Defensive planning assumed American forces could move and concentrate 2 to 3 times faster than German units. Defensive positions were designed around this reality, with layered defenses intended to delay rather than stop American advances, buying time for withdrawals to subsequent defensive lines. The Jeep's psychological impact extended beyond German officers to ordinary soldiers. Gefreiter Hans Müller, captured in the Ruhr Pocket in April 1945, gave an interview to American intelligence officers that captured common German soldier sentiment. Müller stated that German soldiers knew they were losing when they saw how many Jeeps the Americans had. Not tanks, not planes, but Jeeps. They were everywhere. Every American seemed to have his own vehicle, moving freely across the battlefield. Meanwhile, Germans marched on foot and used horses to pull supply carts. It was obvious which army belonged to the modern era and which belonged to the past. Müller's observation cut to the heart of why the Jeep mattered strategically. It represented not just a capable vehicle but an entirely different level of industrial mobilization. The Jeep was proof that America could manufacture military equipment faster than it could be destroyed in combat, creating a situation where German tactical victories became strategically meaningless because American losses were replaced within days, while German losses accumulated irreplaceably. The final accounting tells the story with brutal mathematical clarity. The United States produced approximately 647,000 Jeeps during World War II. Germany produced approximately 55,000 Kübelwagens total. Americans built nearly 12 Jeeps for every German equivalent, and the Jeep was superior in almost every measurable capability except fuel efficiency and weight. This ratio reflected fundamental differences in how the two nations approached warfare. Germany designed specialized vehicles for specific tasks, manufactured them to exacting standards, and used them carefully to preserve limited resources. This approach made sense for a nation with constrained industrial capacity and limited access to raw materials. It had worked adequately during short victorious campaigns in Poland and France, where captured enemy equipment supplemented German production. America designed adaptable vehicles for general purposes, manufactured them efficiently in massive quantities, and used them aggressively, knowing replacements were always available. This approach required industrial capacity and resource access that only America possessed, but once that capacity was mobilized, it created insurmountable material superiority. Post-war interviews with German general officers revealed consistent themes about how the Jeep changed their understanding of what they faced. Generaloberst Heinz Guderian, the architect of German armored doctrine, stated in a 1947 interview that German planners understood American numerical superiority in tanks and aircraft. What they failed to grasp until too late was American superiority in basic transportation. The Jeep, which seemed inconsequential compared to weapon systems, proved strategically decisive. It allowed Americans to move faster, supply more efficiently, and maintain operational tempo Germany could not match. In hindsight, German intelligence should have been more concerned with American vehicle production than tank production, because vehicles enabled everything else. Generalfeldmarschall Albert Kesselring, who commanded German forces in Italy and later in the West, offered similar analysis in his memoirs. He wrote that the American Jeep represented a philosophy Germans did not understand until experiencing its effects repeatedly. Americans accepted that individual vehicles would be destroyed and designed logistics accordingly, maintaining enormous reserve stocks and rapid replacement systems. Germans tried to preserve each vehicle through careful use and extensive field repairs, which constrained operations and reduced overall mobility. The American approach required industrial capacity Germany lacked, but once Germans recognized American capacity was real and sustainable, informed observers knew the war's outcome was decided. These admissions from senior German commanders, made after the war when there was no propaganda value in such statements, reveal how profoundly the Jeep affected German military thinking. The $739 Jeep, initially dismissed by some observers as an inferior copy of German designs, proved to be among World War II's most decisive weapons. Not through firepower or protection or technological sophistication, but through sheer numbers, mechanical reliability, operational flexibility, and the industrial capacity it represented. Every Jeep built represented steel that Germany could not spare, rubber Germany did not have, and manufacturing capacity Germany could not match. Multiply this single vehicle by 647,000 units, then add hundreds of thousands of trucks, tens of thousands of half-tracks, and millions of other vehicles Americans produced, and the mathematics of German defeat become inescapable. Germany faced an opponent who could manufacture military equipment faster than combat could destroy it. The Jeep became the visible symbol of this unprecedented capability. On any given day in 1944, approximately 425,000 Jeeps were operating worldwide in American service. This single vehicle type outnumbered Germany's entire motor vehicle park of all types combined. By war's end, American motor vehicle production exceeded 2.4 million units. German production totaled approximately 345,000. The ratio was 7-1, and that disparity explained why German tactical excellence and operational skill ultimately proved insufficient. The Jeep's legacy extended far beyond World War II. The Soviet Union received over 51,000 Jeeps under Lend-Lease and copied key design elements for their GAZ series vehicles. Britain developed the Land Rover based heavily on Jeep principles after recognizing how effectively the American vehicle performed. France developed the Delahaye VLR using Jeep concepts. Within 15 years of war's end, virtually every military in the world operated Jeep-derived vehicles. The design had proven so effective that no alternative approach made strategic sense. Today, over 80 years after the first Bantam prototype bounced across Camp Holabird, the Jeep's influence remains visible in military vehicles worldwide. The HMMWV that replaced it in American service followed the same philosophy. Four-wheel drive, adaptable platform, mass production, acceptable rather than perfect, performance in any single role, but excellent versatility across many roles. The $739 Jeep from 1941 established design principles that still govern military vehicle development. Those principles terrified German generals in 1943 because they revealed a form of warfare Germany could not counter: industrial warfare, at a scale that made tactical brilliance and operational skill secondary to raw productive capacity. America did not need to outfight the Germans in every engagement. They merely had to outproduce them so comprehensively that German victories became Pyrrhic, costing irreplaceable equipment, while American losses were replaced within days. The Jeep proved Americans could sustain this approach indefinitely, and that realization, more than any battlefield defeat, convinced German leadership the war was lost. When General Feldmarschall Wilhelm Keitel signed Germany's unconditional surrender on May 8, 1945, American jeeps filled the streets of Berlin. They had carried the forces that conquered the Reich from the beaches of Normandy to the heart of Germany, demonstrating kilometre by kilometre that modern warfare belonged to nations with industrial capacity to support total mechanization. The lesson was definitive. Future wars would be won by logistics and production as much as by tactics and courage. The $739 Jeep, simple and unglamorous, had proven more strategically decisive than weapons costing 100 times more. That was why it terrified German generals. Not because any individual Jeep was formidable in combat, but because 647,000 of them represented industrial might Germany could never hope to match. Wehrmacht officers who laughed at early Jeep sightings in Tunisia learned a harsh lesson. They had been outthought, outfought, and most decisively, outbuilt. The Jeep was proof of all three, and by 1944, that proof was everywhere German forces looked, rolling down every road, climbing every hill, appearing in every supposedly impossible location. The Americans were coming, and they were bringing 647,000 reasons why German defeat was inevitable. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.